Fate, Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 29-30. Chapter 29. Meet and Greet. Olga Pav. Olga stared up at the being in front of the gate, who perched on her shoulder did much the same. She suspected that if Berserker had a proper face its eyes would be glaring at them in suspicion as well. What was in front of her was definitely a servant. She could not doubt that, and if she were to hazard a guess, it was similar to her own Berserker considering its size and design. The fact that the chest was an exposed furnace was a rather obvious clue in hindsight. It would also explain the fact that the Romans had acted more weary of Berserker than outright afraid of it if this thing had been guarding their gates. The giant, the same height at the Dragon Slayer armor, stood at the entrance to the city gates. Black molded armor, its right shoulder pad sculpted in the form of a tusk or horn curling downwards while its left shoulder pad was more oval in design. With thick, stocky limbs and a bulky torso it would have appeared somewhat comical. Were it not for the fact that an inferno was bellowing from its chest and the oversized helmet with large protruding horns jutting from either side, although the right horn was snapped in half. The guard servant lacked a face, instead the helm had a single port where the face would have been, where an ominous red glow emerged. Stabbed into the ground with a gauntlet resting atop the pommel, was a blackened greatsword, with an ornamental shaped cross guard, which would have seemed quite amazing to look at, were it not for the fact that the sword was larger than she was. So, Olga coughed into her hand. What is it? The servant's head snapped to her, releasing a low growl. Her own Berserker responded in kind. The centurion corrected, causing Olga to turn to him. Although I don't blame you. He shrugged, don't know. Turned up a week ago. Killed a raiding party of spiders and just kept guard. Why he though? She asked, isn't he a construct? No. The man shook his head. According to the emperor's consort, it's apparently got the mind of a man in there. He frowned, although she wouldn't comment on it further. Shrugging his shoulders, anyway, we'd best be off. He only attacks threats to the gate. Right. Olga muttered, keeping her eye on the servant, still having a staring contest with her own Berserker. Her servant turned to her and followed after, sending one last look at the blackened armor before facing forwards again. Olga was led through the streets, the occasional glance was sent in her direction, or more specifically in Berserker's direction, before they were ignored. Not that she could blame them, her own servant wasn't too dissimilar from the being standing at the gates and, if she was perfectly honest, appeared to be far less menacing. Although the strategic side of her mind was already calculating the use of the servant, it was strong, much like her own servant their stats were similar. If just a little bit slower. If she could convince the Roman emperor, provided it was still Nero, to aid Chaldea then perhaps this singularity would be solved far quicker. They were eventually led to a large palace-like structure. Olga would admit to being impressed by the design. It hadn't actually occurred to her until this moment that she was in Rome itself during the empire's peak. Through there. The centurion interrupted her thoughts. Gesturing to the large wooden doors, Olga noted the two presumed Praetorian guards stood outside, still stone-faced in while standing in the shadow of the large metal behemoth behind her. The emperor is expecting you. He nodded to her one last time before he turned away and walked back the way they came. Oh, of course. Olga noted, cringing at how her voice cracked slightly. She internally cursed. This was no time to be nervous. She needed to appear confident, especially when dealing with Nero. The man was a well-known tyrant and she wasn't going to appear as some frail little girl in front of him. The Praetorians nodded to each other, then moved to push the doors open, revealing the interior of the palace, showcasing the marble floor and large ornamental pillars. It was quite something special. Olga did her best to control her heart rate, carrying herself in with an air of confidence around her. Welcome, welcome. And was immediately caught flat-footed by the presence of a short blonde girl in a red dress which revealed her underwear to the world. Olga dumbly noted that it was white. You must be the visitors that dear Cecilia told me of. Olga blinked, then nodded. Why yes. She steeled her expression. I am Director Olga Marie Animosphere of Chaldea. The woman beamed, closing the distance between the two of them in a heartbeat, looking Olga over with a raised eyebrow and an inquisitive glint. She hummed to herself, then began pacing around Olga, resting a hand on her chin and nodding. Yes, yes. Most splendid. Like a pale rose. Excuse me. Yes. The girl stopped in front of Olga and then sported a wide grin, placing her hands on her hips. I am Emperor Nero Claudius of Rome. Quote. Olga felt time stop for her as the words registered in her head. Nero Claudius. Yes, that is what I said. Nero nodded, frowning, then she suddenly grinned again. Ah, I see. You are so enraptured by my beauty that you cannot form words. There is no need to be shy. She threw her arms wide. Gaze upon the flower of Rome, lavish me with your compliments. Olga stood there for several seconds, still staring at the now identified Nero before she eventually spoke again. I can see your underwear. And immediately shoved her whole foot in her mouth. Indeed. Nero took the comment in stride, pulling at the side of her dress and somehow giving Olga a better view, much to the woman's conniptions. A most spectacular view, is it not? Aye. But you may gaze upon me freely another time. Nero spoke up again, cutting Olga off from whatever comment she was about to make. You are here to aid Rome, therefore I will take you to Cecilia. She will explain all. All right. Olga nodded, figuring her situation couldn't get much. Wait. Didn't the Romans say that the woman was also Nero's consort? She suddenly found herself blushing at the implication. Damn it. Position of strength. Position of strength. Position of stray. My word. Your beauty is most extravagant when you blush. A pale rose such as yourself is a rare find. Nero complimented her with a wide grin. Olga let out a pitiful whimper. Berserker pat her on the back, this time she had no complaints about it. And here we are. Nero announced, throwing open the doors to what appeared to be a private room. In the corner, sat on a chair, was a young woman in a black dress. Long platinum blonde hair which went past her shoulders and wearing a steel mask which covered the top half of her head. Dear Cecilia. I have brought the visitors you spoke of. My thanks, Emperor. The woman bowed her head, a gentle voice which was a stark contrast to Nero. The woman turned to her, causing Olga to raise an eyebrow in surprise as to how the woman could see past the mask. Welcome, visitors from beyond time. I am the firekeeper of the Ashen One, current mage to Emperor Nero. Ashen, Olga mumbled the name in recognition, then titled her head. Do you mean Ash? Blue armor, wields fire. The firekeeper gave a gentle smile, nodding her head once. You are acquainted with Milord. I ask forgiveness for this selfish request, but may I inquire as to his condition? He's somewhere in Rome right now. Olga admitted. The sound of metal thumps behind her indicated that Berserker had entered the room. The firekeeper's head went from her to the servant behind her. The Dragon Slayer armor. She spoke. Milord spoke of it. She gave a soft laugh, full of mirth. He was fearful of Lothric for some time because of his battle with the foe. She turned back to Olga. I apologize for my indulgence. It's fine. Olga replied, tilting her head and walking forwards. Consort. A rumor. Nero replied offhandedly. In truth she has refused my hand, claiming that she would need permission from her lord. Her eyes widened, then turned to Olga with a predatory gleam. You said her lord was here. Why yes. Olga replied. Then Nero beamed. Wonderful. We must return him to Rome at once so he may relinquish his servant to me. Chaldia Pav. Romani took a very long sip of his coffee, eyebrows halfway up his forehead. He didn't know if he should speak up or not. Olga had only shut off the visual link, the microphone was still on. He hadn't realized this until Nero had started speaking. He, and everyone else in the command room, were definitely surprised to learn that the famous Roman tyrant was actually a woman. And then she stared, speaking about marrying one of Ash's friends. Lover. Child. Servant. Then it got awkward. Should we, ahem. Maxwell coughed loudly, earning him the attention of everyone in the room. Should we let her know we can hear them? Da Vinci was in the corner of the room, hand on her mouth trying to stop her laugh from escaping her throat. Failing miserably if her giggles were any indication. Something that was commonplace with several other staff members. Oh, I'm good. Carrie grinned. The brunette woman leaned back in her chair, resting her arms on the back of her head. I want to know how long this can go on for. She then thought of something. How the heck is Ash gonna react when he learns about this? Well, we don't know what their relationship is. Maxwell countered, shrugging his shoulders. Maybe they are friends. She calls him her lord though, so she might be a servant. Yeah, but she sounded pretty happy to hear he was in the Singularity. Carrie replied, a cat-like smirk on her face. Maybe there was a little more to their friendship. Can we please focus? Romani interrupted them, although he looked the most awkward out of everyone in the room, turning away and looking at something. I'll ask Magi Mari. Seriously. Carrie deadpanned, you still have that thing. And what the heck kind of advice is it gonna give us? Don't discount Mary's advice. Romani waved her off, she has gotten me out of some serious scrapes before. So I trust her judgment wholeheartedly. Magi Mari says Ash is getting neterared. The monitor replied in a chirpy voice. There was a deathly silence in the command room. Broken when Da Vinci could no longer contain her laughter and burst out in a fit, clutching her stomach and leaning over. She was soon followed by nearly everyone else in the room. Romani could only hold his head in his hands. Why? He muttered to himself. Olga Pav. Olga took in a deep breath, palming her face while she did. She couldn't see the Cecilia's expression fully, although she had the distinct impression that the girl was sending her a look of sympathy. Moving on, Olga changed the subject, focusing on the woman. I assume you are a caster class. Thou art correct, unfortunately I am a poor sorcerer. Cecilia explained, mine role as court magician was one assumed from the request of the other caster. Because you are far prettier to gaze upon. Nero proclaimed, he is also quite rude. Olga felt a headache coming on. So, you aren't clairvoyant. Thou speak of the gift of foresight. Cecilia inquired. At Olga's nod she gave a reply. Mine eyes see much, however use of them is limited to me. She confessed, mine own tolerance for their gift is small. Olga furrowed her brows. You can't use your eyes for very long then. Long enough to foresee thine arrival. Cecilia replied, then gave a softer expression. Unfortunately, to use mine eyes is to inflict great pain upon me. Damn. Olga grit her teeth, biting her thumb before she noticed something else. You said the other caster. You have too. Nero cringed. Yes. However, as I have stated, he is far less appealing to gaze upon. She sighed, however, he is also request to be informed about your arrival. Her eyes brightened, and it is almost time for Prefect Solaire to report to me. She span on her heel. Come, pale rose animosphere. Perhaps Rome's sun knight has found your friends. Wonderful, Olga sighed under her breath, feeling the headache come back in full force. Perhaps this caster will have a little more information. Ritska Group Pav. Is something the matter, Ash-san? Mash asked the undead servant. He had stopped and suddenly looked around. He turned his attention back to her, helmet dissipating and revealing his visage again. A troubled look on his face. I confess I do not know. He replied, crossing his arms and clenching his jaw. I feel as though something terrible is happening right now. Really? Mash asked, looking worried. Do you think we are in danger? Ash blinked, then shook his head. Not that form of trouble. More uncomfortable towards me. He shrugged. It is likely nothing important. I see. Mash nodded, then looked back at him. Ash-san, why are you hiding behind my shield? Because Sorceress Beatrice has been rather intense in her questioning. He replied, crouched behind her shield, obscuring himself from view. Ever since she learned I could wield abyssal-powered pyromancy, she has been interrogating me with a particular fervor. It is a far cry from her usual personality, and I confess, somewhat disconcerting to me. Is this bullying? Mash mumbled to herself, then shook her head, giving the saber servant a reassuring smile. I'm sure it's not that bad, Ash-san. Forgive my bluntness, but it is not you she seeks. Ash replied, then sighed and returned to his full height. Still. I cannot hide from her forever. Are you going to go back to her? No. He replied, shaking his head and walking around Mash's shield. I'm going to speak with Sir Gareth. Why? I apparently look like a man called Gawain. Ash replied with a shrug, or close enough to him. I'm curious as to the man who shares me face. Mash felt something in her chest at the mention of the name, as if it was familiar to her beyond the history she had learned about. Perhaps something more personal to her. If you will excuse me. Ash bid himself farewell to Mash, moving to the front of the column. Solaire came to a halt, holding up his hand to signal the ones behind him to stop. He looked around before nodding and turning back. This shall serve as our camp for tonight. He turned to the Roman centurions next to him. Magnus, set up the tents. Aulus, establish a perimeter for us. I would hate for our rest to be disturbed. Yes, prefect. The men replied at the same time, then began to echo the orders to the other Roman soldiers. Soler watched them with a small frown. Something troubles you? Verndari asked, walking up next to him. Soler sent him a sideways glance before he released a tired sigh. Quite so. He nodded. I began this expedition with nearly 50 men. We return with 30. He shook his head. The loss of life saddens me. It is the way of soldiering. Verndari waved him off. Only a fool goes into a battle expecting to come out unscathed. A fool or one of superb skill. He chuckled, and I suspect even you or myself are lacking in that department. Soler gave a more genuine laugh. I suppose so. I'm no Artorias, that much is certain, but it is saddening all the same. Have you been a knight captain before? I was recommended for the post in Astora. Soler replied, holding a hand in front of his face and then clenched his fist. But then I developed the brand and journeyed to Lordran to find something important to me. Did you ever find it? No. Soler replied in a tired voice, no I did not. Then his tone took on a softer tone. But I shall keep searching for it, however long it takes. He coughed and turned back to Verndari. Apologies, I babbled, you were saying. Ah, yes. The shielder nodded. Being a knight captain is not about ensuring your men live. It is about ensuring that your objective is fulfilled. He crossed his arms. The men under your command are not your priority. He looked behind him. Soler followed his vision as it landed on Quelaag, the rider at the far end of the makeshift camp. She is your priority, loath as I am to admit it. As long as she is escorted back to your superiors, then you have fulfilled your role. Even if all the men were to die? Soler asked, a hint of disapproval in his voice. Even if they were to die? Verndari replied, that is how it was in Drangolic. All were expected to fulfill their orders. Regardless of cost. I see. Soler nodded his head. I confess, I cannot adhere to that doctrine. You are a warrior of sunlight. Verndari waved his hand. In truth, I did not expect you to, but I offer my advice. You are their commander, you must learn to prioritize. Soldiers are replaceable. The consequences of a failed objective can have a greater impact than the loss of an infantryman. Soler shook his head. I cannot think that way. Sunlight warriors are to stand with their comrades in all things. To abandon one in a time of crisis would sully our name. Verndari stared at him for a few moments before he sighed. Then you are a perfect warrior of sunlight. He marched away, but a poor commander of troops. Were his parting words. Soler stared at his retreating figure before another voice called out to him. I don't think that's a bad thing. Soler blinked, turning around to see Ritska approach him with a somewhat nervous expression. Sorry for eavesdropping. Soler held up a hand to stop him. It is no concern. Our conversation was nothing secretive or to be ashamed of. He chuckled. However, I would ask you indulge a selfish request of mine. Oh. Ritska blinked, coming to a stop a few feet from the servant. What? I was hoping you would offer the rest of your opinion. Soler asked, then went on. You have already begun and it is you that Sir Verndari serves. Would you abandon your comrades for a mission? Ritska stared at him for a few moments, his expression cycling through a litany of emotions before he bit his lip, rubbing his hands. I don't know. He replied. I hope not. He added on, looking back at Soler, but, he closed his eyes and took in a deep breath. No. I would never abandon them. I would always try to save them first or make sure everyone got out alive. Soler stared at him for a few moments before he nodded his head. A fine answer. He admitted, then sighed. However, Sir Verndari does speak truth. While I cannot agree with him because of my principles, I can see the logic behind his statement. You are, whether you wish it or not, a commander of soldiers now. I know, Ritska replied, a hesitant tone, but even still, to leave someone behind to die or to sacrifice them. I don't know if I could do it. Soler approached Ritska, then placed a hand on his shoulder in a comforting manner. I cannot speak for others, however as heroic spirits, our time has passed. We are only brought back for such a limited time. His helmet dissipated, revealing a short mop of blonde hair, sharp facial features and bright blue eyes, a reassuring smile on his face, I know in my soul, that if my death were in some way beneficial to a noble cause, I would not be remiss to sacrificing myself. But, a sacrifice troubles you, the idea of someone giving up their life for others. Solaire nodded his head. You do not like the idea of having to decide the fates of men. He chuckled. In truth, neither do I. Warriors of sunlight are just that, warriors. We are not expected to lead, but to aid our summoner. However, you must lead. And leading requires choices, and many will weigh heavily upon your soul. Ritska stared at Solaire for a few moments before he looked away. I know. Well, actually, I don't know. I've never had to do that before, he admitted, rubbing his arm, but I'm scared to think that I could do it. He shrugged, that I could sacrifice a person for a mission. Only a monster would sacrifice lives and feel nothing. Solaire chided him, a warm smile on his face, and you are far from being a monster if the loss of life troubles you. Still, Ritska sighed, I don't want to be in a position where I have to sacrifice someone. Then you must do your best to ensure that does not happen. The knight removed his hand from Ritska's shoulder. You must be wise, decisive and strong-willed. However, should such a time emerge when you are forced to choose between completing your mission and saving your comrades, you must ask yourself, which outcome would be best? Which would you pick? My comrades. Every time. Solaire replied instantly. Then gave a self-depreciating chuckle, but then again, I am no leader. So perhaps that would be the wrong choice. Ritska stared at him for a few moments before he let out a quiet laugh. Sorry. He waved his hand at Solaire's puzzled look. I'm not laughing at you, it's just everyone from Ash's world seems to be really jovial despite coming from somewhere which sounds like it is always out to kill you. Solaire snorted, giving a wide smile of his own. That is because in Lordran, the best commodity available is good humor and friendship. He gave Ritska a light slap on the shoulder. I look forward to journeying with you, young Fujimaru Ritska. He nodded his head, or you can call me Ritska. Young Ritska then. Solaire smiled, then looked back at the camp. I suspect you are hungry, I would hate to keep you from a meal. Yeah. Ritska laughed, then again, last time I was at a camp one had Estes soup. Truly. Solaire blinked. I did not know it was a soup as well, I am more familiar with the drink. It was quite strange. Ritska furrowed his brows. It tasted of nothing, but it gave a warm feeling. He shrugged, although Sigward said it was an undead's favorite meal, so it might be because I'm, you know. That might be it indeed. Solaire laughed, then titled his head. Sigward you say? A Katarina knight? Yep. The master nodded, big onion-shaped armor. I am familiar with their order. Truly wonderful individuals. Solaire replied as they both walked back to camp. In fact, a good friend of mine told me of a man named Siegmeyer. So he looked like me, truly. Ash asked, sitting down opposite Gareth. The young girl nodded her head. Yep. He really does, or did. She blinked. It's kind of weird too. I keep wanting to call you Gawain but then I remember you aren't him. She nodded her head, although I think you do act a little bit like him. Oh. Yep. You've got this aura around you that makes you feel like a big brother. Although you're a little, she snapped her fingers a few times before she grinned, a little less overbearing than Gawain. When it comes to rules and stuff. She crossed her arms. Also you don't try to ruffle my hair every time you see me. Quote. I see. Ash blinked, titling his head and shrugging. He is your brother, it is natural. I'm a knight. Gareth pouted, being treated like a child by him. She mumbled her breath. Ash snorted, shaking his head. What else can you tell me of him? Ah, he was labeled the Knight of the Sun. Gareth boasted, under the sun he was way stronger than nearly everyone else. Then he had his sword. Merlin said it was basically like a second sun or something like that. She shrugged, he didn't actually use it that often, I don't think I ever saw it. Knight of the Sun, Ash murmured under his breath, then let out a quiet chuckle, that is a coincidence. How so? She titled her head, then widened her eyes in recognition and pointed at him. Ah. You said you were in the same order as the knight with the sun on his chest. A warrior of sunlight. He replied, although I do not draw my powers from the sun unlike your sibling. Yeah. I saw you set your sword on fire during the fight. I did. Quote. Do you also place your palm against the flat end of the blade and run it across to set fire to your sword? She asked suspiciously, her eyes slightly narrowed. I do, Ash replied after a few moments, then stared at her with a slightly raised eyebrow. How did you know? Gawain did that too. She replied, squinting at him, although his fire wasn't black. Most curious indeed. Yeah, you're from a different world or history, right? Yes. Quote. You sure you aren't Gawain from that world? Unlikely. Ash replied with a wry smile. Although I confess I do not remember my past before I rose from the grave. Oh, sorry. Gareth winced. Is that a undead thing? HMPH. Oh, no. Ash shook his head. It is unique to me. Most other unkindled I encountered could remember their past, although they had been raised long before me. He shrugged, perhaps I was simply rushed. Quote. Does it bother you? It is not a pressing issue on my mind. Ash shrugged. It never came up, or I never had enough time to consider it. I confess my curiosity as to my past, but I will not let it deter me from our current objective. He affirmed, my personal matters should not be considered too heavily. Ash noticed that Gareth gave him a knowing smile, as if she were privy to some secret he wasn't aware of. He mentally shrugged, it probably wasn't important. Olga Pav. His workshop is just ahead. Nero proclaimed as they moved towards a back room. Nero continued to strut around as if she owned that place. Which she did. Wait, are you just going to enter? Olga asked in shock. The barge into a magus workshop was a serious taboo. Heck, that was the personal aspect alone, not discounting the likelihood of traps. Of course. Nero grinned, then threw the doors open. Castor. I have blessed you with a visit. So I can hear. Came the dry reply from inside the room. The voice itself sounded deep and gravelly, yet somehow had a refined tone to it. Olga could pick up the barely concealed anger in his voice. A feeling she empathized with at the moment. The Emperor had surprisingly little appreciation for procedure. And these are the visitors the firekeeper spoke of. Some of them. Nero replied. Some are also elsewhere. How quaint. Olga entered the room and saw the servant leaned over a table, the remains of a spider on it. A glowing purple crystalline light hung above his head. She couldn't make out his figure, as much of it was hidden beneath tattered gray robes which hung down to his ankles, along with his bare feet and what appeared to be decrepit gray skin. A hood was pulled over his head and sat atop it was a dark copper-colored crown. Will you not face me when you speak? You are depriving yourself the view of my glorious figure. Far be it from myself to dare gaze upon the flower of Rome. The man replied. Olga raised an eyebrow. He very clearly didn't mean it, although there was the underlying tone in his voice that he did. Apparently that was enough for Nero, who preened at the compliment. Olga gave her a flat look. That emperor was too easy. Nero nodded her head vigorously. I understand that it should be impossible for anyone to gaze upon a flower so freely, yet as emperor it is my imperative to share my visage to all citizens. They truly are blessed. The man stood up. Olga blinked at his height. Nearly 190 centimeters if she was correct, although he didn't look well built, then again he was hidden behind loose robes. He turned around to face her. The front of his robes had a dark section of fabric hanging down over his shoulders and chest. Loosely fitted around his neck were a series of copper-colored metal circles. What caught her attention though, was his face. Or lack thereof. Instead of having facial features, he had what appeared to be a featureless head much like a mannequin. His skin was a light color with roots growing over it and an apparently rough wooden texture. He looked over to Nero, or as best he could without visual eyes. Now, I assume you are here for more than simply disturbing my work. Of course. Nero grinned, then gestured to Olga and Berserker. These are our allies from, where did you say it was again? Chaldea. Olga helpfully supplied, the twitching of her eyebrows being her only indication of her irritation at the Emperor's personality. Chaldea. Yes. I see. Castor sighed, then trailed his head over to the pair of them, jolting when he caught sight of Berserker, the Dragon Slayer armor. He muttered lowly, then looked down to Olga. And said nothing. I am Director Olga Marie Animus. He cut her off with a curious grunt, approaching her rapidly until he towered above her, looking down. What? She backed away slightly, hearing the metal grinding sound of Berserker moving around her to get between the two of them. Curious. Was all Castor said and turned away. As impressive as your golem is, it is no more so than the creature taking residence outside the city gates. Cecilia said it was a he. Nero frowned. Not a creature. It is an impressive invention. Castor admitted, transposing a soul into armor like that is a work of great skill. However, the soul has lost its power. Not it is little more than a tormented mind trapped in a cold body. He tilted his head. What is that if not a creature? Nero frowned but said nothing. Castor seemingly took this as a victory as he turned back to Olga. Who else have you brought with you? My subordinate and his servants. Olga supplied. As is Cecilia's lord. Nero grinned. I am most pleased to be able to meet him. Castor abruptly stopped, ever so slowly turning to Nero. Her lord? He asked in a low tone. Olga frowned, then sent a look to Cecilia. The woman sported a frown of her own. Indeed. Now I shall finally be granted his permission too. I care not for your infatuations. Castor cut her off, then turned to Cecilia. I am, however, more curious about the unkindled. He approached Cecilia. It is a mystery, and a vexing one. He leaned down towards the woman, although I suspect that it shall soon be revealed. After all. He leaned back. Firekeepers are not commonly found, unspoiled. Thou have heard mine position on the matter. Cecilia replied. Olga blinked at the intensity to her voice. I shan't allow harm to befall my lord. Harm. Castor chuckled. Harm shall befall him, either by my hand or another's, it matters not to me. He stood stiff, and do not think me so base as become a victim of bloodlust. There are more important concerns for me. Who even are you? Olga asked, crossing her arms. I shall assume you are another servant of the other world. I am. He admitted. I am Sullivan, Pontiff of Erythil. Anne. Ooh. How unexpected. Why is Pontiff not with Aldrich, you ask? It shall be explained next time. Also, Firekeeper is here. Also, no, the Ashen One and Firekeeper are not romantically involved. They aren't like that, at least to me. I always felt their relationship was more akin to close family members and lovers. So basically their relationship is complicated. Anyway. Yes. That was the smelter demon guarding the gate. Here are the stats for all of them. I also won't be including Sullivan's dialogue, because that would spoil his motivations. Smelter demon. Servant. Berserker. Strength. A. Endurance. A+. Agility. C. Mana. B. Luck. C. Noble Phantasm. C. Ardor in Anima. C. Anti-unit self max target. 1. Max range. 0 to 2. Sets its own body alight with fire. Makes close-range combat difficult due to intense heat and nature of the fire. Equivalent to a ranked magic attack within close proximity. Class skills. Mad enhancement. A. Fleeting moments of semblance are rare with this one. Outside of conflict they are passive, however that does not make them any less dangerous. They are a deceased soul forced into a metal suit. Madness brought upon by a tortured existence is expected. Perhaps some semblance of the man who was once Alon still linger, but the two cannot be said to be the same person. Magic resistance. D. Personal skills. Battle continuation. X. The armor must be destroyed. Even with the loss of the head, the suit will still continue to function. Golem. A. A suit of armor, however, rather than be animated by the memories of a previous owner. It was created specifically to house a soul. Cannot fall victim to attacks designed to kill humans. Mana burst flame, B+. Pontiff Sullivan. Servant. Castor. Strength. C++. Endurance. C+. Agility. B+. Mana. A. Luck. B. Noble Phantasm. B. Sword of Judgment. B+. Sword powered by sorcery made in mockery of the Darkmoon blades. Used as his catalyst for sorcery as well as offensive capabilities. Profaned Greatsword. B+. Sword coated in the everlasting flames of the profaned capital can generate equal level fire attacks. Shadowed Spirit. B. Anti-unit self. Creates a copy of himself with slightly stats lowered by 1 rank. Class skills. Territory creation. A. Item construction. B. Magic resistance. C. Does not extend to fire-based attacks. Personal skills. Sorcery. B. Boreal abominations. A. The crimes of Pontiff Sullivan are well known, if provided with fresh subjects can utilize them to create creatures. Darkmoon Night False. B. Wherever you go, the moon still sets in Erythil. Wherever you may be, Erythil is your home. Under the full moon, Sullivan is granted an increase to physical stats. Unlike a true dark moon knight, who will be subject to a greater boost in benefits whether the moon is shining or not. Sullivan's boost is limited and can only benefit him while the moon shines above him. Mixed blood. B. Child of the tree woman, as such grants him high resistance to the cold, poisons, toxins and bleeding. However is extremely vulnerable to flames. Pontiff's eyes. B+. The longer he fights, the more powerful he becomes, however to get to the maximum rank would require hours of fighting. Harming foes also restores his vitality. Espionage. A. Fairy eyes. D. Relatively low rank due to his mixed blood. He has a strong inkling towards deception, able to see through most lies with relative ease. Fire Keeper. Servant. Caster. Strength. E. Endurance. E. Agility. E. Mana. A+. Luck. A. Noble Phantasm. X. Rhizo Champion of Ash. A+. Summons Undead Servant to control. Parameters are as follows. Strength. C+. Endurance. C+. Agility. C+. May only summon one at a time, no limit to how many times they can be summoned. Max target. Max range. 0 to 100. Firekeeper's eyes. X. Can see the future, only in distant visions, and use of this skill is painful considering. Is a recent addition to her ability to discern true names as well. Class skills. Territory creation. A. Item creation. B. Personal skills. Soul charge. A. Temporarily boost stats to her undead servant or to another servant. Miracles. C. Extends only to healing miracles. Burning of truth. C-. Her eyes are a recent addition and cannot be controlled. She must either use them and inflict pain upon herself, or have them disabled and remain blind. Summoning. I bid thee greetings. I am the Fire Keeper. Thou art free to use me as thy wishes. Dialogue 1. I am always available for you. It is my purpose to serve. Dialogue 2. I shall confess, I am most troubled by the attention I receive. I am unused to it all. Dialogue 3. You speak of master-servant relations. Thou shall rest easy. I shall treat you as I did Milord. Dialogue 4. If you have Ashen One. I feel the presence of Milord nearby. Thou art most kind to reunite us, however I fear that Milord is most protective of me. Dialogue 5. If you have mysterious heroine X. I bid thee greetings and I beg thy pardon. A saber. Thou art mistaken, I am a caster. My servant. Thy speak of the shadow of Milord. Yes, Milord is a saber. Thou art. Forgive me, I do not believe that makes me a saber. Dialogue 6. If you have Lancelot. Thou art most kind in your word, Sir Knight. I also feel I should warn thee that thou art in danger, Milady Mash is approaching as well as Milord. Dialogue 7. If you have Gilgamesh. I was approached by a golden servant some time ago. He made inquiries as to mine eyes. It seems he possesses a similar gift of foresight but keeps it restrained. I confess my jealously as to his ability. Dialogue 8. If you have undead servants. Most curious, I sense a presence similar to Milord but different. It is no matter. I am a fire keeper, that is mine role. All undead and unkindled are welcome to join me. Dialogue 9. If you have Andre. It is most pleasing to speak with thee again, Sir Blacksmith. Thou wishes to forego formalities. As thou requests, Andre. Dialogue 10. If you have Saber Face. There hath been much talk recently of mine face. Apparently is most common. I confess my confusion to this. But I shall take thy word for it. Dialogue 11. If you have Saber Face, Ascension 4. I can see what thy meant. Is most curious indeed. Dialogue 12. If you have Enkidu. I have spoken much with the Divine One. They are a most tranquil being, I confess some similarities between us. We each betrayed our own desired purpose for those close to us. Dialogue 13. If you have. There is much sadness within him, he shuns himself from mine presence. I still recognize him however, for even when alone. I sense his presence close at hand. He is still too kind. Likes. Thou should not trouble thyself with such. I see. I enjoy spending time with Milord, and T. Hates. Thou asks for such strong opinions. I would dislike it if I ever failed Milord. Wish for the Holy Grail. Mine own wish could not be granted through such means. Bond level 1. Thou art most kind to speak with me. I shall still remain here to serve. Blonde level 2. Mine role is to act as a servant to thee, yet thou continues to treat me with kindness. Thou art generous. Blonde level 3. Thou art similar to my lord. He treats me with kindness as well. It is fortunate to know I serve a kind lord. Bond level 4. Thy kindness continues, it would please me greatly to continue this, thou art a good soul. Bond level 5. Thy treat my like a friend. For this, I am most thankful. I confess, thou can never replace my lord. But thou art a good soul. I enjoy our time. Birthday. This is a blessed day, thou art older. During an event. Mine ears detect merriment. Mayhaps we join them. First ascension. Thy hath granted me strength. Is this what my lord calls irony? Second ascension. Thou continues to strengthen me, I confess, the strain on mine eyes has lessened. Third ascension. Mine eyes hurt, but it is no longer burning. For this, I thank thee greatly. Fourth ascension. My sight does not pain me, I am most thankful. Fire keepers are forbidden from having eyes, yet I am most joyful to be blessed with sight. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 30. Signal restored. Ritska Group Pav. He strikes at the hollow, the blow takes its head off, he turns to strike at the one sneaking up on him. It's an easy kill, it will die before he. A bolt slams into his back, he releases a cry of pain. The hollow to his front charges forward, its knife slips into his throat. He chokes to death on his own blood before his body collapses into ash. He rises again near a bonfire. He moves through the graveyard. The hollows die, he cuts through them with little effort. He continues on his path to the. A hollow drops down from above. Its knife slips into his skull, he dies before he even realizes what happens. He rises again, moving through the graveyard. He dies several more times, learning each time he does. He arrives at the courtyard. There sits a giant metal suit of armor, coiled sword through its chest. He approaches it, instinct telling him to retrieve the weapon that pierced the giant. He grips the handle of the coiled sword and pulls, metal grates against itself as the weapon is wrenched free. There's a silence. Then the eye ports on the metal suit glow red, a hand lashes out and grips the halberd stuck in the ground beside it. The giant wrenches it free, and with only a single hand, spins it towards the knight. He raises his shield to defend himself against the blow. Too late. The halberd splits him in half before he even. Ritska woke up with a start, panting as he did. He groaned, pressing a hand to his face. That was quite the horrible dream. He kept dying, over and over again. He shook his head, grunting as he threw the blanket off his body and reached over to his shoes. Sleeping while wearing a mystic coat really was something uncomfortable. He blinked in thought. Da Vinci was supposedly a genius. Maybe she could work up a mystic code that made it really easy to sleep in. Then he abandoned that thought with a wry smile. The director probably wouldn't approve of something like that. He chuckled at the thought, for some reason he imagined she would be furious as to that. He stretched his arms out, moving to put his shoes on, then venture out into the camp. It wasn't actually a bad night's sleep, certainly better than the rest they had in France at any rate. You spoke with them. Ash blinked in surprise as Solaire informed them of his previous conversation. Indeed. The Sun Knight nodded. I made my report to the Emperor and explained our current situation. How? Mash asked, eyes wide. We could communicate with Chaldea because of the interference. Solaire turned to her, raising an eyebrow. I confess, I am not familiar with the tools that this, Chaldea, use for sending messages, however I have found little issue with the summoning stones. Ash blinked. Summoning stones, what do you? His eyes widened, and his mouth went slightly agape. You placed a summoning sign near the Emperor, didn't you? I did. Solaire nodded. Whenever I need communicate with her, I need only activate it and await her summons. Summoning stones. Mash asked. Curious, what are those, Ash-san? The saber turned to her. In Lothric, and I assume Lordran as well, summoning stones are commonly used by unkindled across timelines. They act as an anchor. If I were to place down a summoning sign, another undead like Solaire would activate it, then I would be called across timelines to answer the call. Mash titled her head, like a servant summon. Ash shook his head. Not entirely. The summons are temporary, barely more than 10 minutes, and once the time expires, I would be shunted back to my time of origin. He turned back to Solaire. I was unaware that you could communicate through summoning stones though. Ordinarily, you could not. Solaire agreed, then grimaced. However, Castor made modifications to them, doing so with the intention to allow rapid long-distance reports. Mash blinked at him. That sounds like a good thing though. It is, actually. Solaire admitted, quite ingenious. So, how come you look so annoyed? It is not the summoning stones themselves, Lady Mash. Solaire shook his head. It is rather the man who created them I have issues with. Is there something wrong with him? Thus far, he has proven to be a great help. Then, he lacks any form of boundaries. Solaire said, his entire line of thinking is cold. He focuses only on the end result, and he has made no secret of his disdain for those who have affiliation with lords. Ash frowned, crossing his arms, a character with a dubious nature. He sighed, quite unfortunate, can he be trusted? I have only met him twice. Solaire replied, and, while I dislike speaking ill of someone, twice was more than enough for me to have a solid grasp of his character. Ash nodded, so we are to tread carefully around this Castor then. I would advise so, yes. Did you get their true name? Mash asked. She frowned when Solaire shook his head. I did not, the Castor saw fit not to inform me of it. Solaire sighed. Primarily for personal reasons, he made several choice remarks about my allegiances and how he would sooner give his name to a savage beast of crippled mind than a slave to a lord. Quote. Quite detailed. Ash remarked, shaking his head. Was there other news? Yes. Solaire brightened. However, I felt it best to inform you of that when. He looked to the side. Ah, I see you have awakened, young Ritska. Blessings of the sun upon you. Huh. Ritska blinked as he emerged from his tent, then nodded wearily to Solaire. Good morning to you too. Good morning, Senpai. Mash nodded to him. Ritska sent her a smile and a nod. Blessing of the sun upon you, master. Ash nodded to him as well. You will be pleased to know that Sir Solaire was able to commune with Rome. Really? The master blinked, turning to the Sun Knight. How? I thought we were still under interference. The magic I used was stronger than the interference. Solaire waved him off. However, I do have news more relevant to you. Oh. Ritska blinked. What is it? It appears more allies have arrived in Rome. They also are from Chaldea. Quote. Mash and Ritska gaped in unison. Chaldea. How? The young man shook his head. No, before that, who? We didn't have any other master candidates. He turned to Mash. Did we? Not to my knowledge, Senpai. Solaire shrugged. Well, there was a woman of strong personality by the name of Olga Marie Animosphere when I communicated with Rome. The director. She's here. Quite so, along with a rather large suit of armor. He chuckled, quite fearsome looking as well. I dare say I have not seen another suit like it. He shook his head. She merely inquired as to whether I had encountered you. Huh. Ritska blinked, then chuckled and sent Mash a small grin. Maybe she does care. She also told me to tell you to hurry up and make contact with Chaldea. He went on. She went into extreme detail about what would occur if you did not. Quote. I see. Ritska slumped his shoulders, then furrowed his brows. Did you pass along the information about who might be behind this? I did. Solaire nodded. It seems that they already had some suspicions as to the individual behind this. The abominations we fought only confirmed it for them. Well, at least that's something. Ritska shrugged his shoulders. Is the director waiting for us in Rome then? She is indeed. He paused and then turned to Ash. I also had a message for you from the Emperor herself. Herself. Well, that's. Ash paused, blinking several times as the words registered for him. Herself. What do you mean, herself? Solaire furrowed his brows. I mean, she asked me to give a message to you specifically. No. Ash frowned. I understood that part, but I think the issue is, well, Ritska searched for the right word. Well, you said, she. Yes. Solaire nodded. Emperor implies male, Solaire-san. Mash explained, looking somewhat dazed. So, it is actually odd. Solaire asked, then seemingly sighed in relief. I was confused. Nero continued to call herself emperor instead of empress, so I feared it was a cultural difference. Nero. Ritska parroted, Nero Claudius. Yes. Nero Claudius, the woman. Indeed. Solaire nodded, then scratched behind his ear, looking off to the side, and I assure you, she makes no effort to hide her womanhood either. Quote. I'm gonna go sit down. Ritska replied, rubbing his forehead. Are you alright, senpai? Mash asked. The master turned to her and then shrugged. Well, King Arthur was a woman, Sir Gareth is a little girl. So hell, why not Nero? He chuckled. Who knows, maybe Francis Drake was also a woman, or better yet maybe Minamoto no Raiko was. He chuckled, shaking his head. It's just, how the heck can you get that little detail in history wrong? All he got were shrugs in return. You said you had a message. Ash turned back to Solaire. The knight blinked and then nodded his head. I did. Emperor Nero requests that you hurry along to meet with her. She says that there is something important that must be discussed between the two of you. I see. Ash nodded, slowly, still perplexed as to what a Roman emperor could possibly have to talk to him about. Squire Kyrillite. Verndari's voice boomed across the camp. You are awake, good. Mash turned to him and tilted her head in confusion. Morning drills. We are going to continue your sword play. Ah. Mash blinked, then nodded her head. Yes, Verndari-sensei. I would appreciate being referred to as Esser Verndari. The knight reiterated, however he shrugged, but your customs, as I have been informed, denote a similar tone of respect. So I will allow it. Yes, sensei. Mash nodded, giving Ritska another smile before jogging over to the looking-glass knight. Solaire, Ash and Ritska watched her go, the former crossing his arms and humming to himself. She has spirit, does she not? Quite so. Ash agreed, a small smile on his face, although she seems to lack confidence in herself. Solaire chuckled, shaking his head, she seems to be new to combat. She is. Ash nodded, she had barely been fighting for an hour before I met her. He sighed, I suppose it is to be expected though, only those with natural talent have little to fear when they first engage in battle. True. Solaire nodded, I can see her potential, however, something appears to be holding her back. Her true name. Ritska blurted out. The two knights turned to him with raised eyebrows. The servant whose powers she possesses. They didn't tell her their true name. And, true names hold power. Solaire inquired. Ritska nodded, causing the knight to frown. Curious. He hummed, then allowed a smile on his face. I would guess that this servant did so for a reason. Huh. Ritska blinked. What kind of reason? Perhaps he hopes that Mash will realize her own potential, rather than inherit their own. Ash guessed. It might be to allow her the opportunity to feel as though she is using her own powers, rather than borrowing the knowledge of another. Ritska blinked, then furrowed his brows, turning his attention back to Mash, watching as she and Verndari ran through several motions in practicing sword techniques. Huh. That's actually a pretty nice way of thinking about it. I do not claim to understand the thought process of the one behind this. Solaire interjected, but this is my own personal assessment. No. Ritska waved him off, a smile coming to his face. That sounds pretty good. Quite so. Solaire nodded. Do you think she would be interested in joining the Sunlight Covenant? Ash blinked, then furrowed his brows. That is a very good question. He turned to Ritska. Another good question would be if you wished to join the covenant as well. Me. Ritska blinked, then waved his arms. Oh, no offense, but I don't think I could make that kind of commitment. I mean, you guys are really heroic and all, being summoned to help people in times of need, but I don't think that's really me. Ah. Solaire nodded. I understand. However, the Sunlight Covenant is always open to receiving new members. That sounds like the kind of thing I'd have to ask Farum. Ritska sheepishly replied, rubbing the back of his head. Quote. What did you say? Solaire asked in a hushed whisper, eyes wide and giving Ritska his full attention. Did you just? You. He gripped the boy by his shoulders, causing him to freeze. You know the name of the Lord of our covenant. How? Scarce few in the order even knew that it was not Lord Gwyn who created us, fewer still know the name of the one who did. Ah, Ritska squirmed. We met him. Quote. By the flame, Solaire released him, Backing away. You met. He turned to Ash. You both met. Yeah. Ritska nodded, then cringed. Last singularity, in France. My word. To fight alongside the patron lord. He gave the pair a look of awe, then blinked when he noticed the two pointedly looked away from him. You did fight alongside the patron lord, did you not? Ritska rubbed his forehead. Well, kind of. Quote. Kind of. He had been summoned by the progenitor of the singularity. Ash interjected, it was likely his title is God of War, which meant he had been summoned to begin with. Oh, Solaire blinked. So, you fought the patron lord. Well, Ritska gave a small smile, for a little while anyway. Turns out that Jean Alter, that was the name of the servant who summoned him, evil copy of Jeanne d'Arc, kept insulting his honor. Really started insulting him. Ritska explained, then he got angry about never being able to actually finish any of his fights. I see. Solaire nodded his head, turning to Ash for a further elaboration. In the end, Lord Ferrum turned on Jean Alter. He had already engaged her in a duel when we arrived to finish her. He was already injured in his fight against several servants before he fought her, the two fatally injuring each other in the ensuing battle. He killed her caster servant before he died, however. Ash briefly surmised, then allowed a smile to grace his face. He also requested that we should summon him so that he may fight a war he has interest in. Solaire stared at the two in shock before he shook his head and released a small laugh. That is, quite the tale. He pinched the bridge of his nose. But, he turned to Ash. How did he react to fighting a member of his own covenant? He found it amusing. Ash chuckled. He also expressed pride that a warrior of sunlight could pose a genuine challenge to him. Solaire studied his expression for several seconds before a smile came to his face. Yes. I suppose that would be the reaction I would expect. He turned to Ritska. I would ask that you also summon me after this crisis is resolved. Truthfully. I have always wanted to meet the patron lord of the covenant. Ritska laughed, shaking his head. We'd be happy to have you, to be honest. And I would be happy to join you. Solaire replied with a small bow of his head, then gestured over towards the center of the camp. I also believe it would do you well for some breakfast. I realize that you might be quite famished. Oh, I wouldn't want to impose, but, his argument was cut off by the sound of his stomach rumbling. He looked away as Solaire raised an eyebrow and gave him an amused smile. I suppose I can join you. He's only saying that because he hasn't tried the rations. Aulus joked as he walked past. Not the worst thing I've ever eaten, but you've never seen the worst thing I've ever eaten. No need to frighten the young man, Centurion. Solaire shook his head. Aulus gave him a small shrug. Just making sure he manages his expectations. The Centurion replied, then looked over to where Mash and Vrindari were practicing. He let out a huff of disbelief, and I thought the Emperor was something else. Huh. Ritska blinked. Did they also fight? For the first few weeks. Aulus admitted, that was before Prefect Solaire arrived, along with the Emperor's consort. He shrugged, not that anyone can really stop the Emperor if she wants to do something, mind you. He smiled, she's very much impulsive like that. I believe she would refer to it as artistic flair. Solaire added on. HMPH. Aulus grunted, smile still on his face as he turned to Ritska. Come on, kid. I think Keys was cooking something special. Several Romans around them let out pained groans at the name, causing Ritska to blink in surprise before another voice called out across the camp. Just for that, I'm gonna spit in your fucking stews. All of you. The presumed Keys shouted out. Keys, do not. Solaire commanded with a frown. We do have guests and I would prefer you not do anything to insult them. Quote. Yes, Prefect. The man grumbled. So, Ritska changed the topic. How far are we from the fort? I would say we shall be there by midday. Solaire replied after a few moments' thought, and from there, you will likely be rushed off to Rome. The good news is that when I left the fort, they had secured the border into Gaul. The roads will be far safer to travel. Oh, that's good. Ritska nodded. And how long would that take? Depends on whether you have a horse or not. He shrugged. You likely will so. Perhaps 3, maybe 4 days. That's a while. Ritska noted, then shrugged, but, I suppose I should have expected that. Oh, I think a good walk is nice for the soul. Solaire joked, I always did enjoy a hike through the country, it's certainly more hospitable than Lordran. We were attacked by giant spiders, a frost knight and monsters within the span of a few days. And it is still more hospitable than Lordran. He turned to Ash, although I cannot speak for your homeland. Lothric. Ash replied, then nodded his head, rarely managed to go more than an hour without being beset by some form of hollow or monster. So you see, young Ritska. Solaire grinned at him, this land is actually very welcoming. I feel so bad for you both right now. Ritska replied, sending them both looks of pity. Olga Pav. Still, this is most upsetting. Nero lamented, crossing her arms and pouting, to think that this Ashen One was so far away. I do wish he would hurry along and meet with me so that we may discuss his servant. Olga remained silent as Nero continued to complain, sat at the far end of a large dinner table with a small meal in front of her. She looked over to the far corner and saw her berserker sitting on the ground near an open window, staring at a bird. Somehow, that was the least distressing thing she had seen thus far. While she was disappointed in the limited capacity of communication that the saber servant Solaire had demonstrated, she was at least pleased to learn that Master Kan Fujimaru Ritsuka had not been incompetent in his travels and had been able to identify at least two of the servants they would have to deal with. Unfortunately, discussing plans with Emperor Nero had been less than fruitful. The extravagant woman had spent most of her time complaining that it would take Ritsuka's group, specifically Ash, perhaps a week to finally arrive in Rome. While Olga was less than pleased at the timeframe herself, she knew it was for entirely different reasons than the flamboyant emperor. If there was one other person who seemed to share her exasperation with the emperor right now, it was Pontiff Sullivan. Ironically enough, the presumed half-Phi was actually rather nostalgic to her. Carrying himself like a lord in the clock tower, perhaps one of the more morally grey lords, but one nonetheless. He was sat at the table, the emperor having dragged him there to celebrate communing with Ashen being on the first step to securing her consort. The caster had fervently refused, and it was only when Nero manhandled him into the room with a disturbing amount of strength that he joined them. Then proceeded to just sit at the table and stare at it, presumably tuning out Nero's rant. Eventually his blank, root-covered face, turning in her direction. So, you have history with the saber servant called Ash. She started the conversation, at least looking for some stimulation, and would make her aware if there was going to be any tension between them. He killed me. Well, that answered that question. There was probably going to be an issue. Olga coughed, will there be an issue? That depends upon him. Sullivan replied, the mystery of his firekeeper is one I need answered. Why? They are forbidden from having eyes. Sullivan explained, then raised a bony finger and pointed at Cecilia. The woman sat next to Nero, seemingly listening to the blonde-haired woman's rather long-winded whining, and yet, she has them. Olga frowned, why are they forbidden from having eyes? Surely clairvoyance is a useful skill. Sullivan let out an amused laugh, it is precisely because they are clairvoyant. They would see that which they should not and betray their purpose of tending the flames. He lowered his arm, if she is not blind, then she saw beyond the flame. And the Ashen One betrayed his purpose. Is that bad? Bad. Sullivan rested his elbows on the table, interlocking his fingers, it means I was killed for no reason. Oh. HMPH. The pontiff grunted, but no, for the moment I shall not seek to kill the unkindled. Unfortunate as it is, we share a common objective. Olga narrowed her eyes, and what is that? Avoiding stagnation. Sullivan replied, for that alone, shall I tolerate him? Olga grimaced, she was right. Sullivan reminded her too much of the Magi in the clock tower, she knew where she stood with them. And knew enough not to trust them. Every word that the caster spoke was practiced, seemingly born of kindness. But so many other Magi spoke in a similar tone. Lev did as well. Romani. Olga called into her communicator, has there been any sign of Fujimaru or Mash yet? None so far. Romani's face popped up, his lips in a small frown, although with what you told me of this Solaire, we can roughly pinpoint their location as approaching Martigny. He smiled, so they are getting close to Roman territory. Well, that is at least something. She sighed, then frowned turning to Sullivan. Solaire mentioned a witch of chaos. She asked, what do you know of them? A band of fools. Sullivan scoffed. It is only because their end result is so amusing that I do not wish they all died in their fire. He waved his hand. They are talented pyromancers, but that is the only positive connotation that can be ascribed to them. So can they offer aid for us resolving this current problem? You will find them useful attack dogs. Sullivan answered, not much else. Olga slumped in her chair, then looked back over to Nero, who was still talking to Cecilia. I have been subject to this for several weeks. Sullivan spoke up, no doubt sensing her inner thoughts. You find it does not become easier to tolerate. Olga groaned, palming her face, then pinched the bridge of her nose. What do you know of our opponents? Saint Aldrich is a lord of Cinder. Sullivan explained. He is, in effect, a god. His knowledge of the deep and how to influence it is beyond mine. As far as direct confrontations go, he would not risk it. Preferring to allow others to fight his battles for him, only personal preference however. In direct combat, he is quite skilled. The master of the spiders, however, is unknown to me. And this Vort, he is mine. Sullivan replied. Olga blinked at the rather blunt admission. He is a dog. Whatever talent he had is long gone. And you tell me this why? Because you will no doubt learn of it when you next commune with the unkindled. Sullivan scoffed. It is better that I explain it now rather than later. Regardless, Vort is nothing more than brute force. A simple enough task to dispatch him. And why is he with this, Aldrich, and not with you if you created him? Olga asked with narrowed eyes. Because he is not aware I am here. Sullivan waved her off. On that note, neither is Aldrich, I presume. I suspect his attention will be focused on the unkindled, giving me the freedom to work. He shot a glance towards Nero, if only someone had the stomach for it. I have explained it before. Nero spoke up with a sudden intensity in her voice. What you proposed doing is unacceptable. Monstrous even, and I shall not allow it. Yes, you have made your disdain for my methods well known. Sullivan replied in a tone that made it obvious he was rolling his imaginary eyes. That does not detract from them. If you wish to craft beasts, use the spiders you captured. They are far more complicated to work with. Sullivan argued. Besides, you were the one who proclaimed they would stop at nothing to safeguard Rome. Within reason. Nero frowned. I will not have you abscond with the citizens of my Rome to perform experiments on them. Sullivan grunted and shook his head. If you wish to hamstring yourself, that is your own prerogative. However, I would prefer you did not drag me into such things. Sullivan. The firekeeper spoke up, turning their attention towards him. Thou shalt have more to concern thyself with when mine lord arrives. She explained in a soft voice. Perhaps thou shalt convince thine allies of thy usefulness. Sullivan titled his head, leaning back into his chair and crossing his arms. A threat, firekeeper. Thou forget, I cannot threaten or cause harm. She countered in the same tone of voice with a fixed smile. I only offer a reminder of thine own precarious situation. HMPH. Sullivan grunted, something that could almost be misconstrued as a laugh. And not one with any trace of goodwill in it. Very well. Far be it from me to die to the same unkindled twice. He turned to Nero as he rose from his chair. I shall continue my work on the spiders. He huffed. Measure your expectations. Should you change your mind, I shall be waiting. Then you shall find your wait long. Nero commented absently as the caster left the room. Olga looked between the three with a raised eyebrow. Problems I should be concerned with? She asked. Nero arched an eyebrow at her before sporting a wide grin and waving her hands. Perish the thought. She laughed. I forget that the pontiff is lacking in his appreciation for humans. But he is some form of nature spirit from what I can see, so it is understandable. She sighed. Very pitiable too, the poor man feels nothing when he gazes upon my beauty. Truly lamentable. Very. Olga replied through gritted teeth and a twitching eyebrow. She took in a deep breath before composing herself again. Is there anything else I should be made aware of, Emperor? Please, call me Nero. The woman grinned. A pale rose such as yourself should not stand on ceremony when talking with me. It would be a shame to constrict such a flower like yourself to forced mannerisms. She waved a hand at the firekeeper. You should act like dear Cecilia here. Do you not see how she radiates beauty by merely sitting there? Olga turned her attention to the caster. The woman's eyes were hidden behind the metal cover on her head, but she still got the distinct impression she was looking at her. Olga furrowed her brows as she looked at the firekeeper more closely. She had excellent seating posture. She huffed, dismissing the thoughts and turning back to Nero. Very well, is there anything else that I need to know? Nero nodded her head. I have decided to house you, and your soon-to-arrive companions, in this palace. I shall name it the Pale Rose Delegation in honor of your beauty. Congratulations, Director. Romani's voice called out through the communicator. I'll put that down in the mission log. You'll do no such thing. Olga hissed at him, her face bright red in embarrassment. I'm being harassed by a Roman emperor with a historically incorrect gender. Tell me when you can detect Fujimaru and then tell him to get over here before I go insane. Yes, Director. Romani nodded, scratching the back of his head. I'll put that down. You and your formless mage are free to speak in front of me. Nero went on, interrupting the two, although her face went slightly despondent, although the fact you would deprive yourself the chance to look upon me is saddening. Olga slumped her shoulders, burying her head into her hands. I'm tired. But it is only the start of the day, and I wished to display you to all of Rome. Nero whined, not unlike a child. It always does the people good to see me add another flower to my garden. Flower. Nero nodded. Girls, boys, it matters not. I love to collect objects of beauty, although most of those are mirrors. She waved a hand at Castor. That is why I have also collected her. She shares my wondrous face and has such appealing mannerisms. Is she not the perfect consort? Thou art most kind with thy words, Emperor. The firekeeper replied, giving no indication that Nero's words had affected her in any way. However, thou shalt find mine lord, most protective of me. Of course he is. Nero agreed, if I had such a flower like yourself in my garden, I would be most protective of it as well. They are our allies, Olga. The white-haired woman muttered to herself, they are our allies. Something nudged her shoulder, she looked to the left to see Berserker towering over her. The giant servant held out something to her, pinched between his fingers. Olga stared at the bright blue bird feather in his giant hands being offered to her, she sighed. Then slowly raised her own hand to take the improvised gift. She stared at it with a dull expression. At least this will help me remember to remain strong in the face of excitable people, right? She asked the Berserker. The Dragon Slayer armor stared down at her, not saying anything. And, yes, the firekeeper is a saber face. Because when I thought about how she would look, well, let's face it. Most of us would picture the firekeeper being a saber face in Fate. Yes, Ash is also a Gawain face. Meaning is shall be most amusing when he meets other knights of the Round Table, and Gawain himself.